The Baltimore Ravens were linked to 49ers wide receiver Deebo Samuel by a prominent NFL insider. We talk about what was said, if the move would make sense, and so much more coming up next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here on this midweek edition of the show on Wednesday, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen each and every single day. Free and available for you on all podcasting platforms, including in video form on YouTube, where you can like and subscribe to the channel, and in audio form where you can follow along and subscribe. We're a 5-day-a-week daily Ravens show, so Monday through Friday, we have you covered, plus more. We have bonus episodes on the weekends when there are headlines that we have to talk about. We go live after every Ravens game and every Ravens piece of big news. We are all Ravens all the time over here on Locked On Ravens, so be sure to tell a friend, tell a family member, and spread the word about the show that we have going on here each and every single weekday at the very minimum. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is going to be a big one, going to be jam-packed, because early offseason talk, Super Bowl over, there are always going to be rumblings about certain players, and we've actually gotten more of that this offseason, at least to where we are in the offseason right now. Myles Garrett and Micah Parsons and a couple of other players, Cooper Kupp, and now Deebo Samuel is another one of these names. And Adam Schefter on the Pat McAfee show maybe put a little connection between the Ravens and Deebo. So we're going to talk about what Adam Schefter said, as well as just kind of dive into the move in general, because I do think it sparks the conversation. Wide receiver is a need for the Ravens, but do they need Deebo Samuel? We'll talk about all of that in the first part of the show. Then we'll move on, talk about Derrick Henry, who at Radio Row during the Super Bowl talked about his future, talked about the Ravens, talked about what he wants to do at the end of his career, hinted at some big end-of-career plans. We'll get into all of that. Then finally, we talked about Jim Miller and his fourth-place Lamar MVP vote yesterday with Qadry Ismail, and he doubled down on that. There was actually more that we didn't talk about yesterday that I want to just dive into with that today. So let's talk about Deebo Samuel. Adam Schefter went on the Pat McAfee show, ESPN NFL Insider, and he talked about where Deebo Samuel could end up. For those that don't know, a couple days ago it was reported by Adam Schefter and others that the 49ers have granted Deebo Samuel and his agent permission to find a trade partner after Samuel asked San Francisco to trade him during the players' exit meetings after the season. So it certainly seems like these two sides are headed for a split. This is not the first time that Deebo has actually asked for a trade, and that first time was largely due to his contract. He got the extension, and now it just feels like it's not going to be a thing moving forward. There was always going to be a conversation after Brandon Ayuk, who we've talked about on this show as a Ravens target before the extension he signed. They probably weren't going to be able to keep both Deebo and Ayuk, and with Ayuk on that huge deal, Deebo always made sense as the guy that they were going to move on from. So I personally don't expect Deebo in San Francisco next season. Now, where does that mean he could end up? Well, Adam Schefter named a couple of different teams, but in his answer, he did say, I think it's hard to pinpoint right now where Deebo would go. I could see him in Pittsburgh. I could see him in Baltimore. I could see him a lot of places. Any of those AFC North teams make sense. So when Adam Schefter links these two together here with the Ravens and Deebo Samuel, link can mean a couple of different things, right? Link can mean, oh, well, there's reported interest on the Ravens side. Link could mean there is reported interest on the player side. Link could also mean that maybe an insider with prior knowledge of the situation just says, hey, this is something that maybe was explored in the past, or there's a need here, and maybe there's something that we don't know that Adam Schefter knows. So again, I don't know like why Adam Schefter said the Ravens. He didn't go into any more detail on that. Maybe he will in future appearances, or maybe on ESPN, who knows. But just the fact that Adam said the Ravens and put them in that conversation is super intriguing to me. And this is like an early offseason linking between player and team. Now, does that mean there is interest on Baltimore's side or interest on Deebo's side? No, that doesn't mean that. Now, we could hear a report later down the line that's like, hey, the Ravens had interest, or Deebo had interest, or whatever that entails. But does the move make sense for the Ravens? If Adam's putting them in that conversation and saying, hey, he could see him in Baltimore, what would that mean for the Ravens? Well, obviously they have Zay Flowers and Rashod Bateman. Those are your two guys, your long-term building blocks. Deebo is somebody that obviously has had a very successful career in San Francisco ever since coming in the league in 2019. Deebo is 29 years old right now, just turned 29 about a month ago. So still somebody who has a couple of good years left in him. Now, Deebo, over the course of his career, has never played in a full slate of games. Now, he's only missed that target by 1 or 2 games, mostly over the course of his career. I'll just read off the games. 15, 7, 16, 13, 15, 15. That 16-game slate, by the way, came when the NFL switched over to 17 games. So that's why, he has never played a full slate of games in his career. Now, for those who are saying, oh, that's not that bad of an injury history, right? He still plays 15, 15, 16, 13. Like, that's all good. Yes, but Deebo has had a lot of nagging injuries over the course of his career, and I think that it has kind of labeled him as someone who is injury prone, even though he doesn't miss, or at least he hasn't missed a ton of games. And we go to our handy friends over at Draft Sharks here, who I use to look at injury information because they have a good list of actual injuries that players suffer. Starting off during his rookie season, he strained his groin, then he fractured his foot, hamstring strain, glute strain, calf strain, shin bruise, groin strain, knee strain, hamstring strain, MCL sprain, ankle sprain, scapula fracture, hamstring strain, calf strain, rib sprain, all of this. And he didn't all these injuries didn't result in him missing games. Like, there was maybe a time he missed 1 game off of an injury or 3 games after an injury. Like, for example, he suffered his knee strain January 22nd. He did that in the divisional win against the Packers that year, and he was good to go for the NFC Championship game. But it's just like those recurring injuries, and as players get older, those injuries tend to cause players to miss more time. That doesn't mean it's a case-by-case basis, right? Deebo's not guaranteed to miss time, but I think, like we've talked about before with Julio Jones, we had the conversation about Cooper Kupp. It's like you have to account for, okay, is Deebo going to get injured, and is that going to cause him to miss a game or two? You have to be prepared for that. Now, Deebo's cap situation for the Ravens and any team that were to actually go out there and acquire him, according to Spotrac here, the new team would acquire a 1-year, $17.5 million non-guaranteed deal. Now, San Francisco would have a $31 million dead cap hit if they were to trade him, so they'd have to figure out how that money would work. And for the Ravens, let's just say the Ravens trade for him and they acquire him, they would probably look to either restructure or extend Deebo Samuel to spread out some of that money and whatnot, but it's a different conversation in terms of what that would actually look like. Is Deebo needed on the Ravens? He's definitely not needed. He would provide an extra element. I mean, again, he's not just a wide receiver. You look at Deebo's stats receiving wise over the course of his career. Deebo's been awesome. 334 receptions, almost 5,000 yards receiving, 22 touchdowns. And again, that's not like all worldly numbers or anything, but then you also can use him in a fullback, running back, like gadget player role, which San Francisco has done ever since 2021, where Deebo has 202 career carries for 1,143 yards and 20 rushing touchdowns. So Deebo is kind of like your do-it-all player and someone that I think, when you talk about like missing pieces, in terms of what the Ravens need as a wide receiver, Deebo is a 6 foot, 215 pound wide receiver. So he's not going to be your hulking, big bodied wide receiver, jump ball, go up and get it guy. Like, he's not a 6'2", 6'3", 6'4 wide receiver like that. But there is intrigue because Todd Monken loves running those jet sweeps. He loves getting guys in motion. Deebo could be a player for them to do that. But is that worth the contract? Is that worth the potential injury risk and whatever he brings to the table there? We had a conversation with Kadri Ismail yesterday about, okay, out of a big trade swing, would you want that to be a wide receiver? Would you want that to be an edge rusher? I brought up Micah Parsons versus Deebo Samuel, and Q and I both agreed that we would take Micah Parsons. If you haven't watched that show, go back and listen to it. We go into more depth on that whole pass rush wide receiver conversation. But then you look at some of the other wide receivers, and shout out to to Garrett Ferguson for this list, and this is only a couple of them, but there are going to be some pretty notable free agent wide receivers and guys you could trade for this offseason at that position, including T. Higgins, Chris Godwin, Amari Cooper, Samuel, Kupp. You got Stephon Diggs, DeAndre Hopkins, Darius Slayton, Keenan Allen, Demarcus Robinson, Josh Palmer. Plus, you could go in the draft. So, again, do I expect them to get a T. Higgins or Chris Godwin? No, I don't expect them to spend that type of money on a wide receiver. And, even for Deebo's contract, that's pretty steep depending on how the Ravens would extend / restructure that contract if they do it all. So I probably would say right now, the Ravens do not need Deebo. If they were to trade for him, it probably wouldn't take that much to go get him from San Francisco. I'm sure San Fran wants the cap relief and just to move on. So I would probably assume a day 3 pick anywhere from 4th round to 6th round might be able to get that thing done. I would be pretty shocked if San Fran was able to get a day 2 pick for him, but crazier things have happened before. So we'll see if this develops into anything over the offseason. Again, this is just kind of like an early drop, like Adam Schefter saying, I can see him in Baltimore. But again, Adam saying that, I think, opens up a different can of worms than it just being some, random person. So we'll see if it ends up materializing or not. But for now, we'll just have to see how Deebo in that situation in San Fran plays out, because it's a lot of dead money over there in San Francisco. So interesting situation all around. And coming up in the second part of the show, Derrick Henry on Super Bowl Radio Row had some very interesting comments about the Ravens, about his future, and about where he wants to retire and who he wants to retire as a member as. So be sure to stay tuned. And who he wants to retire as a member of. So be sure to stay tuned. We'll have to get to on Locked On Ravens. First, this show is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you missed the opening tip-off or want to bet on the fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch 3, I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Back here on Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you on this Wednesday edition of the show. Thank you for tuning in. If you're an everydayer, really appreciate your consistent support, listening, watching each and every single day. If you're new to the channel, welcome in. Hopefully you stay a while. We have 5 days a week plus more of Daily Ravens coverage. And if you're somewhere in the middle, welcome back in to the show. Let's dive into Derrick Henry in this conversation around him. He went on the edge with Micah Parsons during Super Bowl Radio Row and had some comments about his career as a Raven, finishing up in Baltimore, winning a Super Bowl, extension talks with the Ravens. So obviously, this all kind of got kickstarted when Diana Russini of The Athletic saw Derrick Henry at the awards show, the NFL Honors, and tweeted out that Henry told her that he wants to retire as a Raven, as a member of the Ravens. And that comment, obviously, music to Ravens fans' ears, first of all. Like, that's incredible. Derrick obviously has been profoundly impacted by his 1 year with the team and 1 year in Baltimore. But he did clarify what he meant by that. He said, quote, "I want to finish my career in Baltimore. As far as who I want to retire with, that's still to be determined. Could be Baltimore, could be Tennessee." So he wanted to, he kind of made it clear, like, okay, the media kind of took that quote out of context, this, that, and the other, because there were a lot of Tennessee fans upset about that and saying, oh, this is like terrible. This is awful. Derrick spent, the first 8 years of his career in Tennessee. And to have a guy spend 1 year with the team, turn around and say, yeah, actually, I want to retire as a member of that team. And that's without a Super Bowl championship, definitely rubbed Tennessee fans the wrong way. There were definitely some nasty comments. So, Derrick literally says right here he doesn't know, but I think it's awesome that Derrick has had such a good time in Baltimore so far over the course of his season or his year with the team, that he already feels that strongly about Baltimore and what that's done for him. And he said, quote, "I love Baltimore. I feel like they gave me a rejuvenation just being there, being around them, being around the organization. I love it from top to bottom. It's a first-class organization for sure." And that's kind of, look, this is not the first or the second or the third or the upteenth time that we've seen a veteran or heard a veteran say this about the Ravens, where the Ravens have been like that go-to destination for the most part for vets who are looking for their second to last contract, their last contract, maybe a chance to win, chance to compete, and a chance to be in a good environment in Baltimore. And that's kind of been the, been the MO of the Ravens organization. Is they're a welcoming environment for vets, and we hear it all the time. We've heard it over the course of their franchise history. We could talk about, we could have a 5-hour show talking about how many vets have had that same response. It's not perfect. Not everybody loves it. I would be lying to you if I said every veteran loved it, and we do know that based off of comments and experience. But for the most part, the Ravens have a sensational track record with those vets, bringing them in, making them feel at home. And for guys that come from, and I'm not saying this about Tennessee, so I don't want to, don't get that twisted, but just for guys that come from worse situations than Baltimore, or worse organizations, if you want to say, than Baltimore, it's a breath of fresh air. And it's just like, whoa, okay, this is different. This is nice. And I think that for Derrick, it is just different. Every organization is different, but it feels like he's been impacted by what he's been a part of so far in Baltimore. Now, also talked about the extension, right? That's something Ian Rappaport reported, and the NFL Network crew reported that the Ravens and Derrick Henry going to start up some extension talks, and that makes a lot of sense. And actually, if we go, and I want to pull up the Ravens, their cap table, because we can talk about what that would actually mean for the Ravens and Derrick Henry, because if you extend Derrick Henry now, he has 1 year left on his contract. So obviously, that means that for Derrick, his cap hit is going to be big because he signed a 2-year extension. It's going to be a $12.8 million cap hit this season. So if you extend Derrick Henry this offseason, you can spread out that cap hit. You can kind of maneuver how that looks. And Derrick did say, he didn't say he was playing for 10 more years or anything, but he did say that Justin, you're going to be seeing me for a little while. So it's like Derrick's not going anywhere anytime soon. He's 31 right now, or at least he'll be 31 during the 2025 season. So I think that for what Derrick is, and again, he did just turn 31. Derrick probably has, especially with how he takes care of his body, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 years, probably anywhere in that 2 to 4 year range. So, and I'd probably even bet on the later half of that. So I think that the Ravens could get away with maybe signing him if this truly is where Derrick Henry wants to retire, his last stop, as he said, and implied there. I think that signing him to a 2-year extension, 2025, 2026, 2027, have that thing run through 2027. I think that's a good, I don't want to say stopping point, but a good reevaluation point for Derrick Henry. As does he want to maybe sign one more 1-year deal with the Ravens, or does he want to hang it up after that? So I would say the Ravens signing Derrick Henry to a 2-year extension that you can add on to the end of this deal. So the Ravens will have him for 3 more years, and you can, again, spread that cap hit out so you have other opportunities to improve your team. And it works out for everybody. Now, Derrick did say that he said, quote, your boy will be up in something in terms of talking about the money and the extension. So it is going to cost the Ravens probably more. Derrick Henry signed a 2-year deal with Baltimore, $16 million. That could go up to $20 million with the incentives, and it was $9 million guaranteed. I expect that to be maybe more in the if it's a 2-year extension, maybe 2 years, $25 million, 2 years, $28 million, maybe something along that. And that to me is worth it, in my opinion. I know there's the whole conversation about paying running backs, Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, all 3 of those guys just, put that conversation in the wood chipper. They said, hey, we're carving that up. And I think a lot of teams now, based off of the year, and more specifically, like obviously Saquon wins the Super Bowl, Derrick Henry has a career year in Baltimore. It is circumstantial, most definitely. Saquon wouldn't have had the year that he had with Philly in New York. Derrick Henry wouldn't have had the year he had with Baltimore in Tennessee. That's just facts. But I do think that the NFL needs to correct back to a more fair conversation of running backs, and Saquon, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, Austin Eckler, Christian McCaffrey, all these guys have been very adamant about the position. And I think that this year was a big step in the right direction for them. So I was shocked the Ravens got Derrick Henry on the deal they got him at. And I hope that they can continue, not like a bargain, the Ravens are stealing money away from Derrick Henry, how good it is for them, but a fair deal for the Ravens and for Derrick Henry, because we saw just how deadly that Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry duo is. And I don't expect it to slow down, especially for Derrick Henry, who again, he's over 30, but he just takes care of his body. He obviously spends hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on his body, which he's talked about. So I'm excited, and I'm really glad that he's had such a good time with the Ravens and such a good time in Baltimore that he's ready to hang it up with the Ravens. He's ready to say, you know what, this is my last stop. I don't want to go anywhere else. That's a huge, huge endorsement of the Ravens and their organization. So he's awesome. Derrick's awesome, and I hope that I'd be shocked if we didn't get the extension notification at some point this offseason, if we're being honest there. But coming up in the final part of the show, we talked about Jim Miller yesterday, the MVP voter that voted Lamar Jackson fourth on his ballot. Well, he did double down on his decision. We'll talk about what he had to say in that conversation and so much more coming up here on Locked On Ravens. First, the show is brought to you by PrizePicks. Football season may be over, but basketball's in full swing, and there's no better way to stay in the game than with PrizePicks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With PrizePicks, you just pick more or less on at least 2-player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. This week, I'm looking at Jason Tatum for more than 29 points. The best part, PrizePicks is quick and easy. You can set up your lineup in less than 60 seconds, and their fast and secure withdrawals mean I get my winnings in as little as 15 minutes. Plus, I love their weekly promos like Taco Tuesday, where you can get discounted player projections for even better value. Download the app today. You can just go to Locked On NFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Let's go to Locked On NFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. We're back here, our final segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you, talking Ravens football. A long way away from the start of the regular season for next year. Off-season content galore here on Locked On Ravens, 5 days per week. So even in the offseason, we bring you that daily Ravens coverage, and we'll go through free agency, go through the draft. We'll go through trades when that happens. And obviously, we'll be kicking back up for OTAs, training camp, and right before we know it. So that'll be fun to kind of dive into how this team takes shape over the next handful of months. But I do want to dive into here. Jim Miller doubled down. For those who don't know, we talked about this yesterday. Jim Miller was the MVP voter who voted for Lamar Jackson fourth on his ballot. Josh Allen wins the award. Lamar Jackson finishes in second place. But Jim Miller had Saquon Barkley in second and Joe Burrow in third on his ballot. And obviously Josh Allen was in first there. So Jim Miller talked about kind of what he said yesterday, but he went on 670 the score, and he ended up talking about just why he decided to do that in more detail. He said, quote, "I've come under a lot of backlash and I don't know why. They sit behind their desks and social media and tweet out this nonsense, but that's okay. Lamar Jackson had a historic year. He's done things at the quarterback position this past year that no other quarterback has done, so I rightfully voted him to be Offensive Player of the Year because he's a unicorn. He's a unicorn. Okay, he's the first one to do it. Saquon Barkley, who I respect greatly, he has really carried the Philadelphia Eagles, but there are 8 other unicorns to rush for 2,000, and now we have extra games that allow you to rush for 2,000. He also talked about O.J. Simpson and all that. So he said, so Barkley is not a unicorn. He's a great player that carried his team, and he is the MVP of his team. I placed Josh Allen 1 for MVP. I placed Saquon Barkley 2 for MVP because he carried the team. I placed Joe Burrow 3 as MVP because they're the most valuable players on their team. Fourth, I put Lamar. Correctly, he was placed Offensive Player of the Year because he's a unicorn. People think MVP is the most talented player in the league. That's not what MVP is. It's what you are to your team. Lamar was not placed Offensive Player of the Year. I mean, I think that he was talking about his own vote because obviously Saquon won the Offensive Player of the Year. And he ended up actually saying, I put Patrick Mahomes 5th in my MVP vote, and I should have put him 1. And here's why, because he's 15-2, and football is the ultimate team sport. And the only stat that matters is winning. So it depends on what your actual definition of value is. It depends on what you actually value more when it comes to what's more important between winning, stats, seeding, and whatnot. Jim Miller said, people think it's the best player in the league. It's not. It's how they're the most valuable to their team, and that's how I viewed it. I have no problem with Jim Miller putting Josh Allen at 1. It was always going to be, to me, either Josh Allen 1, Lamar Jackson 2, or Lamar Jackson 1, Josh Allen 2. I had never expected there was one person who voted Josh 3. There was another. Obviously, Jim Miller voted Lamar 4. Again, at this point, it's just like whatever, right? The MVP's over, and it's not that big of a deal. But I do want to just provide context because voters continue to come out and explain their votes. And I think it is interesting whether they voted for Lamar, voted for Josh, put Josh down on the ballot, put Lamar down on the ballot. So, I don't agree with Jim Miller. And again, there was a national outcry over the fact that Jim Miller put Lamar fourth on his ballot. Like, if he's going based off of value to their team, I mean, is he then bringing in Derrick Henry into the conversation and saying like, oh yeah, well, Derrick Henry is just this super valuable player. And then again, it's like the punishing Lamar for having Derrick on his team. So there's a lot of, I don't know if it's just looking in the mirror that the NFL has to do in terms of their actual voting process, who gets votes. I know that was very loud this season, but at the end of the day, I think that the award itself and the definitions itself and things that we had never seen those things talked about in an MVP conversation before. So it is what it is. Josh won. And again, it was a super close race. Both players had historical seasons, and so did Saquon, and so did Joe Burrow. But some of those conversations that people used against Lamar, people are using in, like, that's what they're using as arguments for guys like Saquon Barkley and Joe Burrow. So again, it is what it is. Josh won, Lamar lost, and now we move forward to an offseason where Lamar, maybe he wins the third MVP next year. Maybe he can improve, because it just feels like Lamar continues to get better and better and better. And it wouldn't shock me if the Ravens can retool, get their offensive line even more right, maybe add a Deebo Samuel. Who knows? Maybe that's the move they make. But regardless, I think Lamar has an opportunity to be even better in 2025, which is crazy to think about considering how good and how historic his 2024 season actually was. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. On the way out, hit that like and subscribe button in video form, and follow along and subscribe in audio form for 5 days a week, plus more of daily Ravens coverage coming up tomorrow. You guessed it, more Ravens coverage and more Ravens content here. So be sure to stay tuned, and I'll see you right back in tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.